So you picked up one of the precons from Modern Horizons 3. That rocks. You've played it a couple of times and you're going, there's a few cards in here I'm not a huge fan of. What should I replace them with? You're in the right place. Jake and I have played all 4 of these decks, and we've got some easy cuts and additions that can make these decks more powerful right out of the box. We're gonna go through all 4 decks, so check the timeline for the deck that you picked up, but do me a favor, if you get value from any piece of this video, hit that subscribe button and share it with a friend who might have picked up one of these precons as well. Mr. Bevers, Ryan, Chris, Paul, Brian, Nikki, Zach, Matt, Harold, Alex, Diego, Raphael, y'all 4-year supporters of the Patreon. Y'all are insane. Thank you so much. Jake and Joel Are Magic is brought to you by Card Conduit, the best place to sell your cards on the internet. TCG Player, the best place to buy them. Drip Shop, the best place to find us streaming live twice a month with a ton of really fun giveaways. Make sure you follow us over there. Dragon Shields are the best sleeves in the entire multiverse for your MTG cards. MTG Stocks is the best site for tracking prices over time, and Moxfield, which you'll see in the video today, is the best website for deck lists. JAJAM's also brought to you by viewers like you. Go check out our Patreon and see if there's a tier that's a good fit for you. We've tried to have cool perks at whatever level you want to support us at over there on Patreon, including a once-a-month play day where we play Commander with the Patreon all day, appearances in our streams, official JAJAM Dragon Shields, and so much more. Go check it out and get involved with our community on a deeper level. If you need a deck list, check the pinned comment. All 4 deck lists are down there. Let's get into it. Let's start off with Omo, Queen of Vesuva, a hybrid green or blue and 2 for a 1/5 shapeshifter noble. Whenever Omo enters the battlefield or attacks, you put an everything counter on each of up to 1 target land and up to 1 target creature. Each land with an everything counter on it is every land type in addition to its other types, and each non-land creature with an everything counter on it is every creature type. This is the deck that I was the most impressed with when we play tested. Omo was the commander I was lowest on going into this, and I think it's because I didn't really fully put together all of the tricksy little stuff that Omo can do. Omo is Simic Value Town incarnate, even though it might not look like it off the rip. Those tokens turning all of your lands into every land type, those tokens turning all of your creatures into every creature type, there are so many shenanigans you can get up to with this deck. And I'll promise you, if you like decks where you have got a battlefield with every single land that you could possibly need and a handful of cards, more cards than you could ever use, Omo, Queen of Vesuva has got your back. Out of the box, the first thing you're going to see is a lot of ramp. You're going to see Satyr Wayfinder, cards like this putting lands into your hand from the top chunk of your library. Cards like Elvish Rejuvenator, putting lands right onto your battlefield off the top of your library. Cards like Uro, allowing you to play extra lands and letting you ramp. And then big finishers that are taking advantage of that. Power and toughness equal to the number of lands you control. Enters the battlefield, search for a land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped. But we can take it a step deeper. With cards like March from Velis Vel, you're choosing a non-basic land type, and each land you control of that type becomes a copy of a creature you control until end of turn and gains haste until end of turn. So any of your huge creatures that you're ramping to, you can have all the non-basics of a certain type turn into that creature and then start attacking. That's going to be relevant because you're going to have cards in here like Cloud Post. Add a colorless for each locus on the battlefield. When all of your lands with a counter on them are all land types, locus is one of those land types, you're going to be ramping like crazy. You can also see that in cards like Urza's Tower. If you control an Urza's Mine and an Urza's Power Plant, you add 3. So you get Urza's Tower on the battlefield with 2 of any other land. With that everything counter on it, this is tapping for 3 mana. Then you play enchantments like Copy Land, enter as the battlefield as a copy of any land on the battlefield, and you're ramping out like crazy. Then you're ready to play X spells like Aggressive Biomancy, create X tokens that are copies of target creature you control, except they have, when this creature enters the battlefield, it fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. So as you can see, it is all about lands, ramping, and being real tricksy with land types and with creature types. I don't know if you know this, but on Moxfield, you can click on more, and if somebody is duplicated from an OG precon on the website, you can click View Precon Upgrades to very quickly see what the upgrades were. Let me show you what I cut from this deck to make room for some of the cards that I added. I cut 15 cards from this deck. Let's take a look at them. Evacuation, return all creatures to their owner's hands. That includes us too, and I don't like that. I don't like running evacuation. Summary Dismissal is a decent counterspell, but look, this one was put in this deck to specifically counter some of the other decks in this pod of 4, so to speak. And so in general metas, this is a card that I would cut out. Mana Reflection, I would cut from this deck and put it in something else. Mana Reflection's not needed in this deck. You can go crazy with it, I guess, but this feels very win more to me. I've seen this deck pop off with just a few of the lands and some everything counters. Acidic Slime in 2024 is just not the kind of card we want to run. Generically good, yes. Synergistic, no. Seer Sundial in 2024, very slow, as is Harmonized. Decent cards here, but not what we want to be running, especially when we're going to be drawing so many cards. So just like Mana Reflection goes overboard with the mana ramp, I feel like Harmonized does the same thing. Poison Dart Frog, just not impactful enough or synergistic enough. Fog Bank either. It can be a really fun time in your decks. If you like silly fun creatures, keep this in, because this is so fun and it will really frustrate the hell out of some of your friends. But in general, it's not going to win you the game, and so I typically end up cutting it. Skull Winder, not impactful enough. Oblivion Stone, slow, clunky. Let's just do our strategy. Vivian Reed isn't impactful enough for what it does. I'm not a Planeswalker hater like a lot of people, but I like to be picky and choosy with what I'm running, and you'll see why I'm running the ones that I am. Desert Warfare is a fun card, 4 mana enchantment. Whenever you sack a desert and whenever a desert is put into your graveyard from your hand or library, put that card onto the battlefield under your control at the beginning of your next end step. We don't care so much about that in this deck if we were to run this, but at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control 5 or more deserts, create that many 1/1 red, green, and white Sand Warrior creature tokens with haste. So you've got the ability very simply to put 5 1/1s on the battlefield every combat. I just don't really like this card personally. 5 1/1 seems small beans to what I want to be doing. Eventually you got a little token army that you can do something with, but we don't have anything to grow our tokens, make them flying, anything like that. And so I would avoid this, cut it, put it in the desert deck that you bought from Outlaws at Thunder Junction. Ramanop Excavator, again, there's not a lot to get the lands into the graveyard here. This is actually a better inclusion for Lurgoyf in my opinion. Drown in Dreams is a fun finisher here, having target player mills twice X cards, but it's only going to ace one opponent, and so we want to try and like take all of our opponents out at once. And I did cut a forest. Look, there's a very strong signal from the creator of this deck. Hey, this deck needs a lot of lands. You always want lands. You can never have too many lands, and so they put 45 in there. That I think was just to be like, hey, hello, look at me, you need a lot of lands in this deck. And I think we can go from 45 to 44 just to make some room for another extra little fun card in there. But be aware, don't go too cut crazy on the lands with this deck because you need them. So these are the cards that I added. Crop Rotation is going to let us sack a land and go get a specific land card onto the battlefield. This is where you go get your Locust Mana Generator. You start going nutso with the Trixie everything counter. Oh, this is a Locust too. I have 6 Locusts. This one taps for 6. I play Copy Land. It's another one. Now this one taps for 7. You know what I'm saying? That is what Crop Rotation is going to allow you to do. That's just one example. Go get the land that's going to help you win the game. Azusa, there's a ton of lands in this deck. You're always going to have additional lands in your hand. Make sure you're able to play a bunch of them really fast. Priest of Titania. I want to take advantage of these everything counters and get tricksy with the creature types, which the deck out of the box didn't lean as hard into. It was very like, oh, lands. We're all about lands over here. Put your counters on lands. But we can also put them on creatures and add a forest for each elf on the battlefield. This is just going to grow more and more over the course of the game when it sits there, because your creatures are always going to have all the creature types. That's just going to happen with all the Omo triggers. I like Riptide Laboratory for similar reasons. If we can get a counter on to Omo, return target wizard you control to its owner's hand. Now we can get that ETB. We can get those everything counters on things without needing to attack. Ooh, baby. We can just bounce it to our hand in response to some targeted removal. Ooh, baby. Oracle of Moldiah, I just told you there's 45 lands in this deck out of the box. If you swap one card out, take literally any card out, take your pick. It can even be one of the most powerful cards in the deck. Run Oracle of Moldiah. You are going to get so much value off of this card in a deck that is nearly half lands. You are nearly 50% to draw a land off the top. Have Oracle of Moldiah just feeding you extra lands. Run this card in a deck that's running 40 plus lands. Please just do it. Raise the Palisades, pretty silly. Everything counter shenanigans. A blue and 4, choose a creature type, return all creatures that aren't of the chosen type to their owner's hands. So this is like, get some counters on your creatures. Play Raise the Palisade. Name the silliest creature type you can think of. Let me know down in the comments what you should name to make sure that your creatures that are everything are covered, but you're going to pretty much return 100% of all your opponent's creatures to their hands, which would just be a silly move for 5 mana. I like that a lot. Animist's Awakening. This is an X spell that I want to play to take advantage of how much mana we're able to make in this deck. You pay into X and you reveal the top X cards of your library, and you put all lands from among them onto the battlefield tapped and the rest on the bottom. It's just such a huge way to ramp very quickly. In a deck that's a lot of lands, mostly lands in there, you're going to hit a lot of hits. And then if there are 2 or more sorcery cards in your graveyard, you get to untap them. So it's just value up from there. Open the Way is kind of similar. It's going to end up being 5 mana most games, but it guarantees the hits. X can't be greater than the number of players in the game, but you reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal X lands, and then those all go onto the battlefield tapped and the rest go on the bottom. It's another ramp spell, guaranteeing yourself hits. It can be any type of lands. I like cards like this in here. Renin 7, that 0 ability just to put any number of land cards from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. Seeing Omo untap, cast a blue finale, draw a bazillion cards. In my head, I'm thinking, I know the deck is over 40% lands. Man, if they had a Renin 7 on the battlefield right now, just to 0, drop every single land from their hand onto the battlefield. Ping! That's when you wink at your opponents because you're like, yeah, I'm getting away with some stuff here. Bonnie Paul Clear Cutter is just silly value. Brand new card. I've been wanting to slam it into a deck, and having a land deck, having your creature token be power toughness equal to the number of lands you control, that seems relevant. Then whenever you attack, you get to draw a card, then you get to put a land from your hand onto the battlefield. Or your graveyard, from the graveyard onto the battlefield. So silly. Just absolute value. It's a dumb Simic value creature in a dumb Simic value deck. This is a slot that is kind of a flex. I've just personally been wanting to put this into something, so I'm going to test it out in there. Scape Shift, this is a necessity. This is a needed. You got to go get you a copy of this. Sack any number of lands, search your library for that many lands, put them onto the battlefield tab. To a newer player, this is not going to sound like a super powerful effect, but it's get those lands, any lands, not basic lands, from your library right onto the battlefield. It's like I was saying, going to be able to search up your Locust, going to be able to search up a specific Urza's piece, stuff like that, or just have a creature like Avenger of Zendikar on the battlefield and scape shift 15 lands away and get 15 landfall triggers all at once. That's a big way to use it right there. Nadu. Winged Wisdom, new card from MH3. I'm sure that you've heard of it at this point. Creatures you control have, whenever this creature becomes the target of a spell or ability, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a land, put it onto the battlefield. Otherwise, put it into your hand. And you can only do it twice per turn. Oh, poor you. Those tokens you're targeting. You're targeting your stuff with those everything tokens. You put one on your creature, you get to reveal the top. If it's a land, it goes right on. It's just ridiculous value. Creature Trixie stuff here. Other merfolk creatures you control get +1/+1 and have Island Walk. You know what we can do with our Omo attack trigger? Put an everything counter on any land on the battlefield. It doesn't have to just be ours. We turn that into an island. We turn our Omo into a merfolk. Oh my goodness. Suddenly our little Omo merfolk can Island Walk. And you can do that with any of your creatures. Very crazy. And then multi-class Baldric, all your creatures that have the everything counter are all types. And then if you control a cleric, a rogue, a warrior, a wizard, Baldric for 1 mana to cast it and 2 mana to equip it, gives the creature equipped lifelink, death touch, haste, and flying if you have a full party and it's preventing all the damage to the equipped creature. Absolutely ridiculous. More creature shenanigans. This is the kind of card that I want to run in here to fully take advantage of it. And then Roaming Throne, if the triggered ability of another creature you control of the chosen type triggers, it triggers an additional time. You can choose your commander's type because all of your creatures are going to be every type, so all of their triggers are just going to be triggering. Roaming Throne has never been more at home than in the Omo deck. The Eldrazi Incursion deck has got big, stompy stuff. That is what we're doing here. This is an Eldrazi. This is a colorless deck, and it fully leans in. Ulalek Fused Atrocity is my favorite and maybe the best commander of a Eldrazi deck we've ever seen for commander. Devoid, whenever you cast an Eldrazi spell, you can pay 2 colorless, and if you do, copy all spells you control, then copy all other activated and triggered abilities you control. You can choose new targets for the copies. This is how you establish a board presence in a deck like this without overextending your hand and running out of resources, so that a board wipe is something that you can't come back from. Ulalek on the battlefield, then when you cast an Eldrazi, you don't have to cast another Eldrazi to get another Eldrazi. You just pay 2 colorless mana and Ulalek's going to give you a copy of that creature. And it's not just creatures, by the way. You can copy Eldrazi spells as long as they are kindred spells, so just keep that in mind that there's some relevance there. A big thing that we're going to want to do is ramp our mana, reduce our costs as much as we can. New cards like Snapping Voidcraw are going to allow us to do that. Just 3 mana for an Eldrazi that's going to play with all of our synergies, but it's going to tap for a Soul Ring's worth of mana just by itself and let us work up toward that. You're also going to have creatures in here that are creating Scion tokens, 2 colorless Eldrazi Scion tokens with sacrifice this creature, add colorless here on Spawn Bed Protector. Those Eldrazi Scion tokens also allowing us to ramp by providing us that 1 colorless mana when we sacrifice them. Any amount of cost reduction or mana ramp is really going to help what you're trying to do with this deck. Cards like Ancient Stirrings, look at the top 5, get a colorless right into your hand. That's going to help you pull some of your mana rocks, lots of mana rocks in this deck. You want to be able to make some colorless mana for sure. Cards like Dreamstone Hedron, keeping you in the game late, drawing you 3 cards. Garrick's Uprising, keeping you in the game, drawing you cards as well. That is how the deck comes out of the box. An Eldrazi deck like this is really open to your tastes. Make sure you can ramp, make sure you're reducing the costs when you can, but whatever big stompy Eldrazi you like, put in the deck. That's where they belong. This is an Eldrazi stompy deck. Make it happen. Ulalek generically good with Eldrazi. I only say that because I'm going to show you what our cuts and adds are for this deck. And know that Eldrazi, some of the choices are going to be money driven too. But if you've got them, put them in there. You know, there's not really a bad way to go about this unless you misbalance your mana ramp and your creatures, which you shouldn't. Looking at my cuts, I've got 11 here. Suffer the Past. This is exiling 1 person's graveyard. If you've got a graveyard player that's only ever playing graveyard, rock and roll. But this is the kind of card that in a pot of precons that are released with a set was put in here specifically to play well with the other precons so they can kind of be rumbled against each other. And Suffer the Past then is not a card that we really need. Morophon is a cool include here, a little cost reduction like we were talking about, but I specifically want to run Eldrazi. If I'm building an Eldrazi deck, I want to play Eldrazi. I don't want to get cute with it more than I have to, and there's a lot of really good Eldrazi options already. So just honestly, for flavor reasons, personal flavor reasons, I cut Morophon from the deck. Mutated Cultist, very specific card. Cast the spell, remove all counters from up to 1 target permanent or opponent. Again, if you're playing somebody who's always playing counters on stuff, +1/+1 counters or planeswalkers, poison stuff, I don't know why you'd want to remove those from your opponent, or energy, which is what I think this card was seeded into these decks to do, was fight against the energy deck. So we can chop it out of here to get a little more generically useful with all of our choices of cards. Selective Obliteration is a card I really liked the first time I saw it, but in general, I just don't like anything that's not a complete solution. If we're targeted removal, let's targeted removal. If we're board wiping, let's board wipe. Obliteration says each player chooses a color, then exile each permanent unless it's colorless or it's only the color its controller chose. Again, cute for a colorless deck, not where we want to be because it's just not going to do everything we want it to be. When Ulamog's Nullifier enters the battlefield, you can put 2 cards from your opponent's exile into their owner's graveyards, and if you do, counter target spell. That's a lot of hoops to jump through in a generic pod just sitting down at a table. If you're playing against these 4 decks, great. Otherwise, this is a chop for me. Inversion Behemoth is another cute seeded card. At the beginning of combat on your turn, switch the power and toughness of each of any number of target creatures until end of turn. You can maybe catch an opponent off guard with this and use it offensively like that, but generally, looking at the creatures in the deck, powers are higher than toughnesses, and so if you wanted to swap them, you would want to do it at instant speed after blockers to save who can be saved. But in general, if we're attacking, we don't care about swapping power and toughness. Kozilek's return is not impactful enough. It could deal possibly 5, but you've got to each creature, so that's not even a complete solution. And it does leave your stuff behind, I guess, but you also have to jump through a hoop to do that. Otherwise, it's just going to deal 2 to each creature, which is just not enough. Eldrazi Monument's super flavorful, but sacking a creature at the beginning of your upkeep to keep it on the battlefield, just to give all your creatures +1/+1 flying indestructible, not really worth it for this deck. I like this in a go wide deck, and this one we're really trying to go tall. We want like 3 or 4 enormous threats on the battlefield, and then to kind of sit back and let our opponents answer those while they wreak just absolute havoc and destruction, and then we rebuild once all that stuff is answered. Eldrazi Monument's more for like, oh look, my line of 20 goblins that were all 1/1s now are all 2/2s flying and indestructible, and I've got an infinite amount of goblins to sack to them. So I just don't like to run it in decks like this. Oblivion Sower is another specific one. Whenever you cast this spell, target opponent exiles the top 4 cards of their library. Then you can put any number of land cards that player owns from exile onto the battlefield under your control. It's getting some free lands, maybe, especially if you're playing against an Omo deck that's nearly 50% lands out of the box. That's why I think that card is in there. I just generically don't like this. Tell me in the comments if I'm wrong about Sower. Eldrazi Conscription's another one. What are we going to put this on that already isn't some enormous, ridiculous thing? This is better in an aura deck to go on like a token. I guess this could go on an Eldrazi Scion, but it's just not worth it at 8 mana. I'd rather put a big threat onto the battlefield. And then Ulamog's Crusher is just an 8 mana, 8/8, attacks each combat if able, Annihilator 2. A lot of cool text on there, but no trample, not impactful enough. I cut it for more impactful Eldrazi. So looking at our upgrades, Flare of Loyalties I really like. It's still under $10. It's from the Commander Masters set. When you cast it, you gain control of target creature until end of turn. It gets untapped, becomes a 10/10, gets Trample, Haste, and Annihilator 2. You get to copy that. When this gets onto the battlefield with your commander, you use the ability. You get to copy that ability. Wow, you're gain control of 2 things. This is like a finisher. 1 card with your commander on the battlefield and able to tap 2 in addition, so a total of 12. That should win you the game, and I think it will if you can pull it off. I like Kozilek a lot in here. Cast it, you draw 4, Annihilator 4. It's a 10 mana one. Having Kozilek, having Ulamog, having some of the classics in here, more expensive choices, like I said, but I like having some of the classic Eldrazi in here, especially these 2. Eye of Ugin, this one is ridiculous. Probably not the best time to pick this up. But if you're playing Eldrazi, these are the kind of cards that you want. Wait for a good reprint of this one. Grab Eye of Ugin when you can, but know that it's something that should go in here. Grab this one from MH3. It's only an uncommon, so you should be able to get this off like Draft Chaff at your pre-release. But it the heralds the end. Going to reduce your 7 or graders to 6, if it's a 7. And then give all your colorless creatures +1/+1, which is something, but it's cost reduction, which is what we want. Kozilek's Unsealing is going to give you 2 spawn when you cast a creature with 4, 5, or 6 mana value. And then if you cast a 7 mana value or greater, you draw 3 cards. So, wow, very, very powerful card here. From Beyond, a little slow. May end up cutting this long term, but short term, it's very worth it to just have Eldrazi Scions coming into the battlefield consistently. And then paying 2 to sack it and go get any Eldrazi card, not just a creature, I think is really worth it. Herald of Kozilek, colorless spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, pretty self-explanatory. Thran Dynamo's really fantastic, 4 mana, good return on your mana the turn it comes into play, and then it's going to just ramp you like crazy into your big top-end stuff. Echoes of Eternity for just absolute overwhelming value. Your triggered abilities of colorless stuff, all doubling. Your copying your casts of colorless spells It's just so much value for 6 mana. And then again, cost reduction. Urza's Incubator, making a 7 mana Eldrazi a 5 mana Eldrazi is huge. This is like, they gotta answer this, or they're just gonna get overwhelmed. This is like giving you the 2 mana back on any Eldrazi you cast, specifically so you can use your commander to copy it. The energy precon is led by Satya. Aetherflux Genius is a white, a red, a blue, and one other for a 3/5 human artificer with menace and haste. Haste is huge here. Whenever Satya attacks, you create a tapped and attacking token that's a copy of up to one other target non-token creature you control. That creature does not have to be attacking that you copy. It can just be on the battlefield. It will be tapped and attacking when Satya copies it, however. Then you get 2 energy, and when the next end step happens, you sack the token unless you pay an amount of energy equal to its mana value. This deck is a little unfocused out of the gate, other than the fact that you are making energy. Cards like Amped Raptor, when it enters the battlefield, you get 2 energy and then some other effects. Cards like Overclocked Electromancer, at the beginning of the combat on your turn, you can pay 3 energy. Aether Geode Miner attacks, you get 2 energy. Lots of energy coming and going with this deck. You also want some payoffs for it. You've got some huge payoffs, stuff like Salvation Colossus, which lets you unearth this enormous, ridiculous threat for 8 energy, pretty insane. And then Blaster Hulk, when it attacks, you get 2 energy. You can pay 8 energy after that. And when you do, it deals 8 damage divided as you choose among up to 8 targets. Crazy payoffs for some of the energy stuff we've got. You've also got a huge artifact sub-theme in here. You've got many cards that are artifacts themselves or are looking for specifically artifacts to work very well alongside. The copies of creatures that you can make with this deck can't be understated. You can get cool enters the battlefield cards like Skyclave Apparition, letting you gain some value by removing things when it enters the battlefield, making an extra copy of those kind of effects. Also stuff with dies triggers. You're sacrificing that token you created. When it dies, you can draw a card with Solemn Simulacrum. Cards like this. Cards with just fantastic combat damage triggers. Professional Facebreaker, when 1 or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, create a treasure token. So you're looking specifically at ETBs, at combat damage triggers, and at death triggers to be where you're putting your synergy for your creatures, so that when you copy them, you're getting some sort of extra value, be it ETB, combat damage, or leaves the battlefield stuff. Past that, you've got some pretty sweet artifacts, lots of energy stuff, obviously. Biden Athasa, allowing us to draw cards when our stuff is dealing combat damage. This deck is definitely about attacking and using your energy at the right time, and that's what we're going to try and do with the upgrades. I made 12 changes to the deck. I put Tune the Narrative in. Very simple, draw a card, get 2 energy. This is the kind of synergistic stuff that a deck like this needs, and the kind of stuff that it got in MH3, to be completely honest. And so I want to make sure that I find myself a nice foil copy, don't get me wrong, but we are going to put this kind of card in here, even though it's a common, just to make our gameplay more consistent. Hellkite Tyrant I put in here because when it deals combat damage, you gain control of all artifacts that player controls. Making copies of this to attack suddenly, nobody's ready for it, they're not able to block, we're stealing it all. Then plus our artifact sub-theme in here being so strong, controlling 20 or more artifacts, maybe we can pull that off. But having copies of this kind of creature, very silly. Lauren, pretty self-explanatory. ETBs, destroy up to 1 target artifact or enchantment. Making copies of this, you're controlling the battlefield. Liberty Prime, I put in this upgrade because I actually am making this the commander of my build. I'm doing a little bit of a different take on the energy build and making it a Liberty Prime deck, but I do think that the way this is built right now, you can still play this as a big beady payoff creature in this deck, and it be huge for you. Aragorn, when it ETBs, you become the monarch, and when it attacks, up to 1 target creature can't block this turn. This is the kind of creature, just making the ETB the monarch trigger. That creature token is going to get sacrificed immediately because it's legendary. But being able to repeatedly make yourself the monarch, and if you're the monarch, creatures can't block this turn whenever your actual Aragorn is attacking, absolutely ridiculous. I love this creature in here. Guide of Souls, another energy rare. You're creating an energy and gaining a life whenever creatures enter the battlefield under your control. Just good consistency for the deck. When a Sushi dies, you get one of two huge effects, death triggers. I want to make copies of Atsushi and get the death trigger over and over. That just sounds broken. Tap Scribe to get an energy if you control 3 or more artifacts, and whenever you get 1 or more energy during your turn, creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. So it can just like kind of stack on itself. If there's multiple single energy upticks, that is just a huge way to grow your line and win like that. AO is a lot like Atsushi, where we want the death trigger and we're just happy to run it in here to make copies for it to immediately die and get the death trigger. Wrath of the Skies is a very versatile energy-based board wipe, so we want to make sure we grab a copy while MH3 is hot and the prices get low over the next 3 months. Sean is from the Fallout decks. Whenever you attack, you can create a tapped and attacking token that's a copy of a legend, except it's not legendary, and it gets another type that Sean looks for when Sean leaves the battlefield. It's going to take all synths with him, but creating non-legendary copies of your legendary creatures, I mean, you can see how that can get out of hand almost immediately. If you've got extra copies of Satya on the battlefield, making extra copies, you're going down an Inception rabbit hole of copies. And then Dr. Madison Lee, there's enough artifact synergy in here that I think that this is a fantastic 99 choice. Just printed, so it's super cheap right now to pick up a copy. This was the commander of the Precon deck, but we're going to use it in the 99 here. Looking at what we cut from this deck, we started with Coveted Jewel. I know a lot of players like this. It's just not my cup of tea. I don't want to pass this around and give everybody value. It's cute politicking, but it's not the kind of politicking I like. Plus, it's expensive. Just not where I want to live. Wayfarer's Bauble. I want our ramp on mana rocks with this deck. And so going and getting lands, fantastic. Don't get me wrong. Wayfarer's Bauble still really good. But I want more artifacts in this deck. And so having an artifact that is specifically meant to be sacrificed to its own thing, not even be sacrificed to one of our other effects, not where I want to be. Legion Loyalty, way expensive, huge win con, but I've just never cast it successfully, and so I haven't fallen in love with this card. Let me know in the comments if this is a card that I'm underestimating. Burnished Heart, I feel like I cut from every precon nowadays. It's just super clunky and slow. It's a relic of the past. Coalition Relic is not a relic of the past, but just wasn't a card that I really liked in this. Maybe if we were proliferating more so that we could get more charge counters on it before they go away, but when you're removing all charge counters from it at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase just to add a mana for each charge counter removed, I want that to be ticked up a little bit more. And so maybe if you're proliferating more with your build, Coalition Relic can stay. You can proliferate energy, so I could see people going that route. I cut a Plains. I cut Combustible Gearhulk because I hate this card. It's just not great value. Target opponent may have you draw 3 cards. If they don't, you mill 3 and that player takes some damage equal to mana value. It's just not worth it. It's just not impactful enough for how much it's costing. This is a huge spell. You probably shouldn't cut this because it's a fantastic board wipe. I just don't like to run Farewell personally, especially in a deck where all of our stuff is half of these artifacts and creatures. That's just such a huge sub theme for us. We don't want to exile them. If anything, we would want to board wipe along with everybody else and then do some sort of resurrection that would help us. Angel of Invention plays more into the let's get a lot of tiny artifact creatures on the battlefield if you wanted to play the lieutenant commander of this one, but for us this doesn't really synergize fantastically and isn't really exactly what we want to be doing, though I could see Angel of Invention copies where you're fabricating servos onto the battlefield and the multiple angels are all giving everything +1/+1. You could see how it would get ridiculous. Again, another huge copy target here, creating 4 1/1s every time and then letting you grow its power with your 1/1s that you created. It's just clunky, and I wanted to go a little more streamlined with what we're trying to do. Silverquill Lecture is a card that I'm really interested in, but not for this deck. I want to find what deck it is that I really love this in, but it's just not this one. Demonstrate has been really fantastic for me. I've personally liked it on the Resurrection Demonstrate spell, the one that lets you return a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield and lets an opponent do the same thing if they want. I like to cast it when they can't, you know what I'm saying? Silverquill always giving an opponent a copy of whatever creature you've chosen to copy when you demonstrate it. I don't know. I want to find the right deck for that, but this I don't think is it. And then Brutaclad was a later cut for me. Our creature tokens are already tapped and attacking, so we don't care too much about haste. Maybe if you lean more into the creature token thing, that's kind of a signal in this deck that you could build it that way. Brutaclad's a good way to go, but for the way I built it, wasn't a great include. Disa the Restless is at the head of the Lurgoyf Jund Precon deck, a green, a red, a black, and 2 other for a 5/6 human scout. It says whenever a Lurgoyf permanent card is put into your graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, put it onto the battlefield. Then whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, create a Tarmogoyf token. Now, there are not, even with the printing of this deck, a ton of Lurgoyfs. There are some, and we have put them in here. You're going to want to look at two main types of strategies with this. If you can find some Lurgoyfs or ones get printed, or you just grab all the ones that we've got and, like I said, wait for more to be printed, wait for more to come down the pipe, you can lean into the self-mill thing. Enters the battlefield or dies, you mill 3 cards. More of that, the most of that you can possibly put in, because every time a Lurgoyf gets milled off the top, boom, it's right onto the battlefield, and you can win in enormous ways like that very quickly. If you can mill like half your library, all your library, you can also do things like make them all just Lurgoyfs. Creatures you control are every creature type, and the same is true for creature spells you control and creature cards you own that aren't on the battlefield. So a good combo with this would be your commander on the battlefield and Maskwood Nexus on the battlefield, and then something that's going to let you mill a lot of cards all at once, get all those Lurgoyfs for free, hopefully give them haste, and maybe win the game right there. But be aware, all of your combat damage too is going to create Tarmogoyf tokens, which will have power and toughness equal to the types of cards in graveyards. They are still very powerful, and if you can consistently create these tokens, that's also a way to win with this deck. Past that, pretty generic Jund creature-based graveyard deck. Get stuff into the graveyard. It can give you haste like Anger. It can give you more power on Quorum, and you can play the stuff. There's a little bit of a Cascade sub-theme in the deck out of the box. There's also a little bit of a token thing that combines with some consumption that is built into the deck, lets you sacrifice stuff like Zeatora. Past that, it is just Jund, a little bit of Reanimator, a little bit of value, Jund amount, graveyardy type strategy that is just going to win a lot of long games. But the deck is probably the least powerful out of the box. Because it's the least powerful out of the box, I made the most changes to this. We got 21 cards I added. I added Tarmogoyf because it makes Tarmogoyfs, so I feel like we should be running Tarmogoyf just out of principle, but also very much so it being a Goyf deck to look for Lurgoyfs. If we don't have our Maskwood Nexus on the battlefield, we want to run every playable when we can, and Tarmogoyf is very playable. I want to go with the token strategy a little bit more than the Goyf strategy. We're going to run the Goyfs so that if we do hit them and we can get them for free onto the battlefield, dope. But we're not going to lean on that too much. We're going to lean on creating Tarmogoyfs. And I want them all to have Infect and Trample. That's a good way to win with this. I saw 5-6 power toughness Tarmogoyfs consistently being created. 2 Infect Tarmogoyfs connect. You've given them +1/+1. That's more than 10 poison counters a lot of times. Just 2 4 power Tarmogoyfs, and then you cast Triumph of the Hordes. They can hit. If there's no blockers, boom, that's a game win. Garruk's Uprising, lots of creatures entering the battlefield. You're gonna have power 4 or greater ones. You're also drawing cards when it enters and giving them all trample, which is nothing to shake a stick at. We're trying to self-mill, so we want some recursion. We want to be able to play stuff from our graveyard. Conduit's gonna let us do that. Magnivore is a semi-playable Lurgoyf, so we put it in. Changeling Outcast not only counts as a Lurgoyf, but it can't be blocked. So it's, with our commander on the battlefield, a little Tarmogoyf creating machine. Skull Prophet's gonna be a mana dork that also mills us, which is quite nice. Ginger Brute's another option that I really like in this deck to be an unblockable Tarmogoyf creator. People aren't gonna see it coming that your Ginger Brute comes over, flicks the opponent, and creates a Tarmogoyf. Mesmeric Orb is going to let you self-mill at a higher rate. Tarian Mauler's another way we can cheese looking for Lurgoyfs. If we're milling, we're getting Lurgoyfs right onto the battlefield. Changelings are every creature type. Hello, free Tarian Mauler. Crucible is a money choice. If you don't want to get it, I understand. But it's a lot like Conduit of Worlds in that it's going to allow us to play stuff from the graveyard. Worldly Tutor, there is a Pyrogoyf in this that is just letting you shoot your opponents for an enormous amount of damage every time Goyfs are coming onto the battlefield. That is a win con in this. It has been so powerful that I think it's worth running a creature tutor specifically to go get that to win the game. If you're creating those consistently, 4, 5, 6 power when they enter, 4, 5, 6 power getting thrown around by that creature, you want it 100% you want it. I've seen it win games with this deck. Big score. I think we need a little draw in this. We need a little create some treasure ramp in this, and discarding lets us get stuff into the graveyard. Plus, as an additional cost to cast a spell, we discard a card. Lurgoyfs, if they go into our graveyard from anywhere other than their battlefield, we just get it onto the battlefield. Hello, free Lurgoyf. Draw 2 cards, create 2 treasure tokens, all for 4 mana. Terror of War, decently playable Lurgoyf. You're in. Masked Vandal, playable Changeling. You get to exile an artifact or enchantment by playing with your graveyard a little bit. Dope. If we've overmilled lands into the graveyard, 4 mana. If we've got at least 2 in there, this is on rate. If we've got 3, we're beating rate. Splendid Wreck, it's typically 4 to go get 2 basics or 2 gates. Something like that, out of your library onto the battlefield. If we've got 2 lands, 3, we're beating it. Splendid Wreck belongs in this. Breach the Multiverse is going to let you self-mill, and it's going to let you recur some stuff. Huge spell, great finisher. Animate Dead, we need a little bit of reanimation in this deck. There wasn't a ton of it. Animate Dead is fantastic, as is Victimize. We can sacrifice a token that we've created. Sacrifice any of our little cheap stuff that's already done its job, like Masked Vandal. Return 2 creature cards from the graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Nethergoyf, another playable Lurgoyf. Watch for Lurgoyfs to be printed. You want them in the deck. Grab yourself a Nethergoyf. And Buried Alive, 3 creature cards right into the graveyard. Did those enter the graveyard from anywhere but the battlefield? Yep. Does Buried Alive say 3 mana, go get 3 Lurgoyfs right onto the battlefield for free? Yep. 21 cuts, so I'm going to go through them pretty quickly because there's a lot of them. Thrinax here is that classic sacrifice Jund, get some creature tokens to further sacrifice stuff. Not what we're trying to do with this deck, so I cut it. Exterminator Magmark is a really fantastic card, but for like a spell casting deck, not really where I want to be here. Izoni enters the battlefield, you create a 1/1 for each creature card in your graveyard, and then you sack a creature to draw a card. Good value, just not the kind of payoffs we're looking for. I cut Burnished Heart a lot. Gluttonous Hellkite, new card, cool card. We're just not doing a lot of sacrificing. I like that it's each player, and this one's right on the line. If you want to include it because you want some Jund shenanigans, get it going. This one for me, though, it just isn't on theme for us, and so I chopped it so we can get some goify things going, a little reanimator thing going. Death Reap Ritual, it's just waiting around to draw cards. Eventually you'll get good value off of this, but for the 4 mana out of the gate, it's not really doing much. Final Act isn't as good as I think it reads. It's mostly just going to destroy all creatures and exile some graveyards, but you can't choose to not exile your graveyard, and that sucks in this deck. So Final Act, there's like a mode we can't even use on here. The last mode is unusable basically all the time. Destroy all battles, also unusable. 6 mana, destroy all creatures, all planeswalkers. Okay, whatever. Garruk, Apex Predator, classic Jund, giant planeswalker, just not necessarily on theme with us, so I chopped it. Same thing here, Jund, sacrifice, it dies, cool kind of thing, but I don't want that strategy to be where we're living, so I chopped it. Kolaghan's Command, not impactful enough, pass destroy target artifact. Riveteer's Charm, not impactful enough, pass sack a creature with highest mana value they control, but we can for 3 mana make everybody do that, and then the other 2, they're fine. Broodmate Tyrant, big Jundy Dragon, take this and put it in your dragon deck. It's just not what I want to do here. So Vala, good mana ramp here, but it's not necessarily graveyard. It's not necessarily always going to be drawing us cards, maybe once or twice. So Vala just doesn't have a home here. I cut Talisman of Resilience just because we don't really care too much about artifacts with this deck, but having some ramp on the ones that we left in are fine. Reaver Cleaver, getting treasure tokens with this sounds great, but 6 mana to get it onto something, don't love it in this deck. I want this in an equipment deck, something dedicated. Good reprint for your equipment deck, but not for this one. Grist isn't impactful enough in Commander to be a planeswalker in a Commander deck. Siege Gang Lieutenants creating us some tokens, but I told you we've sacrificed the sacrifice sub-theme somewhat, so we don't really want to deal with that. Bituminous Blast, good casted spell, but 4 to a creature, come on. Maelstrom Pulse was put in here to answer specifically a lot of the copies that are getting made with the other 2 precons. It's typically not going to be impactful enough in Commander. And then I chopped them out in a forest because we can make some room for some more fun stuff. Yay, when in doubt, cut lands. As far as ranking these as they are out of the box, I think Omo is the sleeper hit. I think Eldrazi is right under that, just being big and stompy, and If it goes unanswered, it's absolutely going to take over the game. I really like the energy deck below that one. It can get tricky and copy some stuff at opportune moments, especially with that commander having haste. I think it can catch people off guard. And then the graveyard deck out of the box is just a little unfocused, but I think with some updates, that commander could be particularly strong, especially if you just want to lean it toward like unblockable 1/1 silly chumps that work toward getting your commander on the battlefield and then just making an army of Tarmogoyfs. I think that's a way you could honestly take it if you wanted to. Those are the upgrades for the MH3 precons that we've got. Let us know how we did in the comments. And if you've watched this far, consider joining the $10 tier of our Patreon. We've got a free pack of custom dragon shields over there waiting on you if you join that tier. And you're going to get an exclusive video on the Patreon, only the Patreon, every single week. That's not posted on the YouTube. That's an exclusive video just for those Patreon supporters at that tier or higher. Go check it out. Any tier of our Patreon is going to unlock signed card, our Commander Play Day. Thank you so much to all of our patrons. We'll see you at the next Commander Play Day. Play some Commander all day through the Discord. Sounds like fun. See you very soon. Thanks to all our patrons. Thanks for watching. Bye.